This is every major feature iPhone stole from Android directly. Let's go. First of all, pull down on your iPhone screen right now. That shade, notifications, alerts, little bits of information stacked neatly feels pretty normal, right? Well, here's the funny part. When Android users were doing this in 2008, iPhone users were still tapping pop up boxes one by one. Yes, Android launched with a persistent notification shade from day one. Apple didn't add anything close to it until iOS 5 in 2011. That's a 3 year gap. And once Apple finally added it, nobody questioned it. It just became the iPhone way. But a pattern formed. Android does it first, Apple reframes it later. Behaves holier than thou. In fact, the next thing is kind of crazy to think about because early iPhones couldn't truly run apps in the background. If you left an app, it basically froze. In Android land, well, from the very first Android phone in 2008, apps could keep running. Music, GPS, syncing, all of it. Apple eventually gave in with iOS 4 in 2010, introducing multitasking, but with tight restrictions and very careful wording. Even today, iOS kills background apps aggressively, considering how the biggest battery an iPhone has ever had is 5000 milliamp hours, while Androids are now bringing 10,000. Now, here's where the things start getting downright funny. Because one of the most iconic Android features people have used for years is widgets. Actual interactive widgets on the home screen. Weather, calendar, music, Android users had them since 2008. iPhone users, they waited until 2020. Unbelievable. An entire generation of smartphones went by before Apple added home screen widgets in iOS 14. And when they did, it was framed as a brand new design philosophy. Even though they have had widgets on the home screen sidebar for a long time, yet you couldn't add them to your home screen directly. Same feature, new story. There's another that Android users interacted with for years until iPhones finally had them in iOS 7. What is it? Quick toggles, Wi Fi, Bluetooth, etc. On Android, you could swipe down and flip switches before Apple allowed anything like that. Apple took around 5 years and 7 iOS versions to add quick toggles in the form of Control Center. But wait, tapping is about to expose this pattern even harder. Because for the longest time, iPhone users were locked in to one keyboard. Unlike Android users, they were installing third party keyboards like Swipe and SwiftKey back in 2010. Apple didn't allow third party keyboards until iOS 8 in 2014. And when Apple added it, the conversation shifted from why doesn't iPhone have this to look how polished Apple's version is. Again, different framing, same idea. Now, let's talk about organization because this one took Apple a very long time to accept. Do you know that on Android you always have had an app drawer? Apps lived in one place. Your home screen stayed clean. On iPhones, every app dumped straight onto the home screen. There was no app drawer until iOS 14 when Apple added the app library, an app drawer that automatically categorized your apps into different folders. And now, when Android OEMs have been copying this category system into their app drawers, iPhone users call it a copycat when it literally took them a 12-year delay to introduce the app drawer. At this point, some iPhone users might be thinking, at least Apple invented the gesture navigation with iPhone X. Well, I had to break this to you, but Palm Pre tried this in 2009. But for the nerds out there who will argue that Palm is WebOS, not Android, well, the Nokia N9 had gesture navigation in 2011. So yeah, even though school gesture navigations are not purely an Apple idea from the get-go. Now the next one is very recent. If you've ever used a Google Pixel, comment down below if you know this feature. Unknown number calls, Google Assistant answers for you, and live transcribes it also. You decide whether to pick up. Android users had this in 2018. Apple added live voicemail with real-time transcription in iOS 17, 5 years later. And right after that came Hold Assist, letting your phone wait on hold for you. Android users, Pixel phones had this for years. Apple added it in iOS 17. And if you're thinking, well, we are kind of roasting Apple, well, you ain't seen nothing now. Because now, let's talk about Apple's biggest strength, customization. Pun intended. For years, Android users could change icon shapes, tint icons, place apps freely, use custom launchers. All the while, iPhone users couldn't even move the icons as per their choice on the home screen. Yes, people just kind of ignored that. But anyways, iOS 18 arrived. Suddenly, icons can be tinted. Apps can be placed freely, is customizable enough to call it a start in a good direction. But again, if you compare it to Androids, it's like comparing a rat to Godzilla. Now, I almost didn't include this, but the comments on the flagship video of my channel suggested otherwise. And yes, makes sense because the dynamic island, which Apple presented as a revolutionary way to blend the camera cutout hardware, which Android has had for years, so basically persistent UI elements that expand, show live activities, navigation, music, and calls. Android had variations of this concept for years through system overlays, bubbles, etc., let alone third party apps made by developers. So I think it's a pretty safe idea to assume that Apple didn't invent this. They just formalized it. And that's a pattern that has gone on for years. Android experiments, Apple standardizes, and plays holier than thou, like I mentioned earlier. And in fact, the category that Apple is still pretty much behind and has barely made it in has to be AI. And yes, this is probably one of the biggest weaknesses of Apple in a really long time. So let's just say that various AI features have been present in so many Android phones for a really long time too. From live translation of calls to object erasers and other AI photo tricks, which Apple is still catching up in. And again, this isn't about saying Android is better, Apple is bad. It's about breaking the myth that iPhone features appear out of nowhere because when you line up these timelines, the story flips. In fact, I also made a flipped version of this video. That is, Apple's most original iOS features everyone copied must be visible on the end screen. So if you're interested, go watch it. And yes, don't forget to like, dislike, or comment. And of course, would be a massive support to the channel if you subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one.